All right, well, let's get started. Welcome everyone to what is the second research roundup of the spring semester. This is a series of events that we run here in the Eberly College. It's great to see everybody online today. We've got a really good group, which I think reflects the broad appeal of our topic today. Just to briefly introduce myself, my name is Duncan Lorimer. I'm serving as the Associate Dean for Research here in the Eberly College, and hosting on behalf of really our team in the research office, Erica Bentley, Leah Heron, and our three intrepid graduate students, I think are all on the call today, Lee, Stone, and Claude. So we're here today, and just before we get actually started into the main program, I did want to just mention a few events that are coming up, and I think Claude will be dropping some of the links into the chat that you can follow up on these things. The first thing is the survey for today's event, which just allows you to give us a bit of feedback and suggest future topics that we can cover. We typically do 2 or 3 of these every semester, so we're always looking for new things to cover. So please take a bit of time at the end of the event today and fill out that survey. And I did want to remind you, particularly those folks in the humanities that are calling in today, especially those, that Leah is organizing an NEH fellowship event, and I believe, Leah, it's next Thursday at 1 p.m. Is that correct?
That is correct, and it's by Zoom. So email me for the link.
Fantastic. And then looking a little bit further ahead, we are currently exploring a date for probably next month for our next research roundup on how you can use the media in your research. And we'll be bringing in our communications team in the Eberly College and other folks as well. So please look out for that. That'll be in our newsletter, and you can reach out to any of us at any time as well. For those of you in the college that are joining here today, I know we've got a lot of folks on the call from around the university, but for those in the Eberly College, we encourage you to, the faculty in the college, to apply to participate in our grant writing workshop, which is going to be held on the week of May 16th. We're very excited about that. That's going to be pretty much a week-long intensive activity that we will be facilitating, and it's led by a former faculty member in English, Cheryl Ball. So more details about that will be forthcoming, but I think there's an application form link in the chat for those of you who are interested in that. Well, without further ado, data science is the focus of today's event, and we thought it would be good, as this field is emerging and it's being applied across the university and really impacting pretty much everything we do these days, be it within our in our day-to-day lives and our scholarly work, to have a focused event that really explores the questions: what really is data science and how can I use it? So I'm delighted to be able to introduce our 2 presenters today. I'm just going to give you a brief bio on each of them, and then I will hand it over to them to run the presentation, and encourage you. It's really a very interactive discussion. We'd encourage you to drop questions into the chat, and then feel free to interact with the speakers as well. So I'm joined today by 2 relatively new faculty within the Eberly College, at least, that some of you will have heard of, but perhaps not all of you. So it's a good way for them to be introduced to the broader community as well. So Dr. Sam Workman is a professor and director of the Institute for Policy Research and Public Affairs in the J. Rockefeller IV School of Policy and Politics at WVU. So his research interests focus around American politics and public policy, and he's an expert on legislative and bureaucratic policymaking. He writes about rural politics and policy, especially in West Virginia and the broader Appalachian region. Prior to starting at WVU, as the inaugural director of the aforementioned institute, he started in January of this year. Sam was formerly a faculty member at the University of Oklahoma. Our second speaker today is Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar. Snehalata is currently professor and associate chair in the associate director, I think, in the School of Mathematical and Data Sciences at WVU, which we'll be hearing about today. That's a new school that's been reorganized out of what was formerly the math department here in the college. Snehalata joined WVU in July of 2017 as the chair of biostatistics in the School of Public Health, and transferred over to the Eberly College in July of 2020, and has been leading the development of a new data science program in the school. Prior to coming to WVU, Snehalata was a professor of statistics at the University of Wyoming, and also served as the deputy director of the Statistical and Applied Mathematical Institute in North Carolina. So those are the brief intros to our speakers. I'm going to turn it over to them, and I believe, Snehalata, you are going to share some slides and kick us off today.
Yep, yeah, I think Sam is here. Deeply working on a grant. So.
And a senator's problems right now too. So.
Senator's problems. I don't want to know. Okay, so give me a second. So what we planned on doing is not so much talking forever, but just sort of a very informal way of trying to give you a sense of what we think of as data science. And this is an emerging field. Different people have different definitions, but it is very, very interdisciplinary. Okay, so we don't need to introduce ourselves. Thank you, Duncan. Okay, so when we were going back and forth on setting this up, actually Sam typed this up, and I think it explains quite nicely a way of thinking about what data science is. So it's not so much a set of techniques, but it's really a way of centering data in the process of research or knowledge generation. And the key thing is that it involves the science part, the substantive expertise, analytical techniques. So this would be things like statistics and mathematics and other sort of quantitative bits, and human-machine interaction. And I think in some sense, computer science comes in all of these parts. And then this is all put together, a large part of data science, especially as we're looking at big data, is how to collect, organize, store, just that those first steps take up a huge amount of time. And then the analysis. And the analysis is really focused on what the data can get us. What can we understand with it, but also what it can't. So it's analytical, it's logistical, and as we have bigger and bigger data and different types of data, I think this is all, that's why it's emerging and evolving so fast. So this is how I think of it. I was trained as a statistician, so it's all very cut and dried. You can see the difference already. So I think for me, it's really using data to solve problems and using a diverse set of computational and modeling tools. So in statistics, I tend to think, I actually think that statistics, this was originally how statistics started. All of these various methods were developed to solve problems. And some of them were, pretty important problems, like the t-test, which everyone is familiar with, didn't just come up because, we thought about, oh, what's the sampling distribution of blah, blah, blah. It came about because Guinness was having trouble making beer and having the batch to batch variability, having any control over that. So it was really a quality control problem. But over the years, statistics went off into this, let me develop a method and then look for an application. And that backward, that flip is I think, effectively why stats look so different than data science at this point. But the bigger issue is that data over the years has changed from not just being numbers, but huge amounts of text data, images. A lot of images are where the action is at this point. And if you think of sequences of images, that's what gets us videos and loads of other types of data. And the other part also is science is used very broadly. So I always put it in quotes, really. It's not just what we think of as, physics, biology, chemistry, but it's the humanities have a very big digital component now. Text analyzers, image analysis in the fine arts to detect fraud in paintings and so on. The social sciences, and a lot of statistics actually started out in the social sciences, but the computational part has really, really taken off at this point. So everything from predictive modeling for trying to work out recidivism to, huge numbers of applications. And again, different types of data, a lot of text analysis. Even things like law that we never really thought of as having a data science component. Natural language processing does a huge amount of the searches for things like patents, et cetera, et cetera. So the data, our definition or what we can analyze as data has broadened, and therefore what all of the different disciplines are doing also has become quantitative in different ways. And it's very, very fast evolving. But one of the things that I think some people will talk about sort of data science being synonymous with machine learning or deep learning or, whichever methodology, but those are just some of the methods that are used in this area. So they are not synonymous with data science. So just a little bit of history, because I think it helps to have the context of where things come from. So John Tukey, who was an amazing individual, he was the developer of both the box plot, the box and whiskers plot that we teach in like middle school, elementary school, maybe even. And he was also the co-developer of the fast Fourier transform. It used to forever, it was called the Cooley-Tukey FFT. So back in 1962, he talked about the field of data analysis. Whoops. And this was in an Annals of Mathematical Statistics article. And this apparently, just like before I was born, but apparently this created a huge stir because this was the height of the mathematization of statistics. But he really talked about, I really am a data analyst. Anyway, so this seed was sort of planted, and Donahoe, who's a statistician and data scientist really at Stanford, talks about this being really the beginnings of data science, at least in the stats world. But from the mid 80s onwards, there was a call for this new field of data science. By 1994, Business Week had articles. In 2009, there was a data scientist group on LinkedIn. In physics and astronomy, there was an astrophysics report in 2010 that talked about data science being key to the education of astronomers, because what astronomers had been doing had changed over the years. In the old days, they sort of got huge amounts of money from NSF to build, giant telescopes and so on. By the 2000s, that had all changed over to having to write computer programs, basically, to analyze the huge amounts of data that was coming in from various missions. Biology, same thing. Even before the human genome was sequenced, in 98 or 99 or so, maybe a little bit later, sequencing had just changed how biologists got data. It changed from, sort of field work type stuff to sitting in front of a computer. At this point, we've been looking at videos of animal behavior. This is where a lot of the action is in some neuroscience research and so on. In the geosciences, same thing happened about almost 30 years ago. I think remote sensing started taking off. And so a lot of satellites, et cetera. So a lot of GIS data. And now drones are collecting what people used to spend time doing field work. So loads of imaging data of different types. And then, as I mentioned, natural language processing has really changed a lot of stuff in the social sciences. And text mining was a term that was coined in the mid-2000s. Okay, well, I sort of have these different aspects of data science in here. So there's data science and there's data analytics. And some people use these terms interchangeably. Some think of one as the subset of the other. They really sort of overlap. I think basically data analytics usually refers to stuff that's much more related to business settings. So the overlapping skills are things like, basic programming, Python and R, SQL, basic statistical analysis, things like data mining, storytelling. Data storytelling is a term that's often used in both of these. But then if you look at the things that are different, the data science bit is much more sort of, in some sense, under the hood skills to sort of look under the hood, versus data analytics is really to do things fast and get them out, and very much in a business setting. So, that's just a different flavor of things. So exactly what does data science need? And so when we put together the undergrad major, and this is what a lot of majors in data science look like. So it really is this Venn diagram. So you have computer science, but not all of computer science is needed. Same with math and stats, and same thing with the domain knowledge, right? So machine learning is, so this is sort of the methodology part, which is really what the intersection between CS and math and stats. Software development really sort of falls under computer science, and then different things happen in different domain areas, and then the research. So data science sort of sits in the middle here. So some other thoughts. A lot of people will say that it's the computational power and the ability to code, but more than that, it's open source programming that really has helped data science. Because as soon as data became available, huge amounts of data, the accessibility of being able to do the analyses, that accessibility for everybody really came with open source programming. So these are sort of the key things that you see in data science. The languages, programming languages that are used. So I think at this point, it's really Python and R. Some people will put Julia in there and a few others, but it's really Python and R. And then you need to know what to do with SQL. So, and these are object-oriented, meaning that a language should be able to recognize an image as a data set versus, or a video, or just plain old tabular data like we used to have in the old days. All of that, you're really thinking at a higher level than sort of line by line. The data are often big. For the most part, data science will deal with data that you can't download on your laptop or wherever. But that doesn't mean that's the only sort of data you deal with. And the structures are varied. So, text, images, things over time and space, et cetera. But there's something more. And this has to do with the methodology and sort of the point of view in some ways. So 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago now, Leo Bryman, who was a statistician, he was at Stanford, I think. Then he left, he went and worked for several years. Then he came back. And he wrote this pretty influential article called Statistical Modeling, the Two Cultures. And his industry experience had turned him into thinking that, this sort of change was happening anyway in the stats world as well. This tension between, is the goal of data analysis to predict, or is it to explain? So are you building models in order to explain things? How do things work? Or are you building models to predict? And he makes a pretty strong point that prediction is really where the action is. And then there are, rejoinders from others, including Brad Efron, who's, very well known for the bootstrap, who said, no, we do both. So anyway, this is an interesting discussion, and there's loads that has happened since then. Prediction in this world, in the data science world, at least the way it is practiced, happens basically via learning. So you need huge data sets so that you can split your data into a training data set, a validation set, and a test set. So that's the big data part, except that the very basic issues of the data set that you have should really be representative of what quote unquote population you're trying to study. That is incredibly important. And if that, I think some in the data science world call this data provenance. If that is not followed, that is how we get to these really ridiculous results out of algorithms. So for instance, I think everyone's probably aware of the downsides of facial recognition technology, right? So the first of these, I don't have the numbers offhand, but I know where to look them up. You know, a lot of the facial recognition stuff was trained on data sets that mainly consisted of white men. And so they're very good at figuring out white men. People like Oprah Winfrey are misidentified. The misidentification, the error rates for African-American women are incredibly high compared to even white women. And this is not the algorithm that's at fault, it's what it is being trained on. And so that learning, if the learning is faulty, if you learn something wrong, you're going to do something wrong, right? So that's effectively the intuition there. The other thing also, and I don't know how to make this thing go away. Sorry. Okay. Is that machine learning methods, and this is where sometimes a lot of tension comes in between sort of math stat people and sort of data science people. You know, this started out when neural networks first showed up about, I think, 30 years ago. Totally black box, right? Because you're predicting, you're not trying to explain. You're using the data and, you know, things are being sort of algorithmically, you know, different combinations effectively of things are being used to see which one predicts the best. So if your goal with whatever you're doing is prediction and you don't care about explanation, then find methods that are useful for that. But if the goal is to explain things, then don't use black box methods. And this is not just a data science thing. You know, the methodology has to be appropriate for the question that you have. Whoops, now I've messed this up. Okay, there we go. So these are just a few other links that I think are useful, and Sam put something in the chat as well. IBM has a very nice data science introduction, really nicely sort of written up. Kathy O'Neill, who is a mathematician data scientist, and she wrote this book a handful of years ago called The Weapons of Math Destruction, which is an incredibly useful book to read. And she was one of the first people to start pointing out, look, it's not, you know, the algorithms are doing stuff, but stuff is going to get bad if we don't pay attention to how they're being implemented, et cetera. And then Rachel Shute was trained as a statistician, and she worked at Google. She might still work there, I'm not sure. But they have this O'Reilly publication that we can get through our library called Doing Data Science. And that explains things very nicely, just in the beginning first sort of intro chapter. Then there are various blogs. One of the blogs I like is Matthew Brett, who's in the UK. And he's got a nice sort of, you know, and he also links his to some text that's being used at Berkeley. And then this David Donahoe paper, 50 Years of Data Science, really puts things in perspective as to, you know, what is different about data science, what, you know, what's important, what to pay attention to, and so on. So that's kind of my overview thing. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to send, you know, I can send this to Duncan or Erica. And okay, how do I stop sharing? Somebody, there we go. Have I stopped sharing?
It's still showing.
Good God.
There's usually like a thing at the top of the screen.
Right. I'm looking for the thing at the top of the screen. Okay, you're just going to have to look at my screen. So, okay, hold on. The thing at the top of the screen went to the bottom. Am I?
Yeah,
I'm gone, right? Now. My screen is gone?
Yep.
Phew. Okay, Sam.
All right, so I guess, so what I would like to do is just talk a bit about the relationships between equipment, as it were, and data science and the size of data. And then I'll show you an example of things that are really quite simple, but employ data science sort of principles. Well, they're simple in one respect and employ some of these principles. So the first thing that I think a lot of people, when they come into data science, have in their mind is do I need 1 million observations to be, to adhere to these principles? And the thing to understand about the development of data science is it arose out of folks working with extremely large data sets. So millions of observations, images over seconds and things like of that nature. But as it's become refined as a science and a discipline of its own, the principles that undergird data collection for, say, 1 million tweets are the same as you would employ for hundreds of observations in a text or something like that. And the reason they're important to follow is a couple things. One is if the data aren't collected, stored, managed, organized properly, well, that becomes the gift that keeps on giving. And so when you get to the analytic component, the programming components, you find yourself in trouble. And the reason data science arose with this attention to sort of large data sets is because those logistical problems are a nightmare for data that size, right? But they're no less applicable to hundreds of observations. And so I put something I wrote there in the chat that's a very sort of simple way to start with principles of data science. And it's the thing we most do first, right? Which is, how do we collect some data and store it in a way that we're going to be able to use it later in a sensible way? The other thing I would say about the sort of the birth and emergence of data science as a discipline is the principles that sort of undergird this stuff are key to making your research generalizable. And so we're entering a world where, as you well know, if you've interacted with Google, Amazon, the government, or any set of organizations, right, is your data is very valuable, right? And so as a scholar, you want it to be the case when you collect data that at some point someone else is going to be able to use the data as well. And so adherence to some of these sort of principles, not just for collecting data, but analyzing it, and then right on through to the conclusions we draw from it, it folds right into sort of the generalizability of our science, right? The second thing I would say is that when we're doing data science, in the discipline of data science, and folks who sort of interact with these huge data sets, you often see them use, fairly sort of complicated tools, right? At least to the onlooker, R and Python and whatnot. But these principles are a science even beyond the set of tools one uses. Now, if you're going to be sort of scraping the web and doing all this stuff, you're going to need to learn R and Python. But it's not always the case that every part of the data science endeavor is complicated, right? So a lot of what I do is classification of text. And so once it's classified, it's very often the case that I'm not using very complicated statistical models, right? We're looking at bins and things like that. So what I want you to walk away from this workshop understanding is that data science it's emerging as a discipline, a science of how we center data. And it is not so much, it's not as dependent on having these million observation data sets anymore. And it's much more, even within, if you're using Python or R, it's much more eclectic in terms of tools than sort of traditional stats where you pull out Stata or SPSS or Excel or something like that. And that's just the way to go. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Now, I'll talk a little bit about a project that I've been a part of for years and used to play a bigger role than I even care to remember, that uses a lot of these principles and techniques just to give you a flavor for sort of what's possible out there. So let's see. Can everyone see that? So this is the website of the Comparative Agendas Project, and I used to be the manager, the one responsible for getting the data together, and Professor Thomas, someone else on the call, I think followed me up in doing this. But by my conclusion, working with the Comparative Agendas Project, I was its associate director. And so if you were to look on here and you can say explore, do a trend tool, what this data is it collects and catalogs by topic the text of nearly everything governments do across this entire range of countries. And what's interesting is about this project, and kind of the reason I bring it up here in this meeting, is because this project actually grew up with the development of data science. And so back in the old days, right, we would gather, say, every hearing in Congress, and we would hand code that hearing by topic. And what do I mean by topic? Well, just something you would recognize as an issue, right? So labor, agriculture, education, environment, stuff like that. And we would sit there and we would read a description that was a summary of something, and we would classify it by hand. Well, as time went on, what resulted from these hand-coded data sets were really nice training data sets for coding other types of government behavior. And so now we look at these and we, I can click one there, it's agriculture. And we look at these, well, let's want me to click one of these first. Let's do US, data type, parliamentary and legislative, topics, agriculture, do CRS reports on agriculture. So there you go. So there's all the reports back to 97 on agriculture that the Congressional Research Service issues. Now, what we do now is this is all supervised machine classification, which means we use data sets, coded data that a human has coded, and then we feed those service training data sets for a set of algorithms that classify text. And then we gauge how well those algorithms do by our substantive expertise, what we know about the issue area. So what I guess in my part of this, what I would like to convey is just that a lot of the data science as a discipline starts from very simple problem-oriented concerns. I really love that Snehalata talked a lot about the problem orientation that much of this grew out of. And here, all we wanted to do was understand what issues governments pay attention to and how they prioritize those issues. And so, and it's grown into something now that it incorporates all of this sort of computer programming and whatnot. And so I'm going to stop the share there. You can check that website out on your own if it's of specific interest. But many people do similar things with literary texts, right? So one of the most prominent examples in data science of sort of text mining and sentiment analysis and things are an analysis of Jane Austen's novels, for instance, right? And so these sort of tools and principles are open to every single person on this call. If you're willing to sort of adopt it as a science and sort of begin to center whatever type of data you have, whether it be images, text, numbers, whatever, in the research process there. So I'm going to leave it at that, giving you an example, and I think probably be good to take questions now from folks.
Well, thanks very much to both of you. Yeah, we've got 20 minutes or so for discussion and questions. If people want to drop things in the chat, we could read those out, or if you want to just click on the little reactions button at the bottom of the screen there and raise your hand, that would be great. Please, any topic is fair game, I think. Looks like Shin has a link in the chat there as well, and Margaret's been dropping some links in as well while we've been talking. I guess one question I would have is, many people perhaps are coming at this from, you know, they have an interest in, you know, they have a specific problem that they think might benefit from some of these ideas that you've been introducing, and as a data analysis application, sorry, a data science application, and you know, what would you recommend to them? You know, as somebody that perhaps hasn't had much formal training in computing techniques, or, you know, hasn't done much data analysis up to this point.
Well, if I were to take that head on, what I would say is the very first thing is, if you're working in a field where you're collecting data, there's a reason I started with sort of the data, you know, putting that little ditty up there on data collection and whatnot, is learning how to collect and store data, being faithful to the data and storing it in a way that it's useful later in the process. Because, I mean, you can know all the statistical techniques in the world, but if you show up and you have, let me give you a for instance. Something I see a lot when people first start collecting data is they'll compile a spreadsheet of data that has sort of multiple nested column headings at the top. That is an utter and complete disaster for you and for anyone using the data thereafter. So while all of this sounds complicated, right, and we can talk about hurdle models and event analysis and all these distributions and R and Python, if you are not faithful to the data when you collect it, then nothing you do after is going to be easy or make sense to anyone else. And so what I would recommend is, in the, I think it's the American Statistician, there is a set of, and I'll tell you what, I will see if I can dig these up when I mute myself here and post them. There's a set of articles about how to collect and store data in spreadsheets. Very simply, that would be the very first thing I would recommend to you. Learn how to organize the data in such a way that you're going to be able to use it and other people will use it. And that becomes a huge logistical issue in data science, because in the website I just showed you, right, that's a living data set, meaning it is updated all the time. So if you fail to do those initial things well, then there's no logistical legacy that you can rely on to keep your research program alive. So I'll dig.
Yeah, just to add to what Sam's saying, it's the storage is important. And I think the reason that things like R and Python have become, especially R and RStudio, have become so important is because you want the whole pipeline set up so that it can be reproduced, meaning a whole program. And if you want, I can sort of show what one of these things looks like, where you are writing, you're doing your analysis, the code doesn't go away anywhere. And some of this goes back to in 2011, Duke University was sued for a cancer trial where a couple of people died. And the MD Anderson Cancer Center, there were a couple of statistician data scientists there who spent time figuring out that the reason the cancer trial was done incorrectly is because the data was read in incorrectly. So it was something as simple as the column, like Excel will have a column with the number, the row number, and that got read in as a variable. And this was, you know, you can Google Duke sued for cancer trial. This was on ABC News. I mean, this was huge. And after that, the two people at MD Anderson basically set up a reproducible research pipeline. So there's a whole area of sort of research within data science called reproducible research. And this is in the CS world and the stats world, where you want to set up these pipelines so that, you know, you get exactly the same results from the same analysis. And in statistics now, a huge number of journals, you cannot just submit a paper, especially if it's an applied paper, you have to upload your entire pipeline. And, you know, you make concessions for it, the data is still not publicly available, et cetera. So that's really, really important. And building those sorts of pipelines is a large part of what you do in data science.
Very good. Thank you. There's a few things coming in the chat. Looks like Sheena was posted something asking what the attendees have in terms of needs. Maybe Sheena, if you want to elaborate on what you wrote there.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, so the research office is very invested in seeing data science grow across the institution in terms of as a research tool, because we think it's probably integral to almost very few disciplines are going to miss out on the data science revolution. And so we're very interested in seeing what tools we can provide to the research community in order to help accelerate that for you. I'll give you an FYI that, you know, there's a lot of different efforts to teach various computational skills on campus. They're all complementary to one another. They shouldn't be seen as in competition with one another. And one thing the research office will be offering probably in the May timeframe is beginning software carpentry for the social sciences. So we're waiting to find an external instructor for that. So just FYI. But in the meantime, there's much more that we can do. And so I'd be interested in hearing from you. What do you think your most acute needs are to get moving on that front?
Can I just add one thing to that? So this semester, we're sort of trying it as a small pilot project almost. We have a handful of people because we're trying to work out how to do this. So we meet for an hour on Fridays, and we officially, I think, have it as a 1 credit hour course for grad students. But it was not like widely advertised because we're just starting. So we're trying to do this data science collaboratory type thing, where people come in and don't give seminars the way we're used to giving seminars, but really talk about the data, the focus on the data at the start of a project. And then we're trying to see if people can start collaborations and such. So we'll learn from what we are going through this semester, and then we'll open it up next semester. So the hope is that we sort of grow this, this group. So.
Yeah, if anybody.
Yeah, we have silence.
It's tricky when there's this many people on the call.
I know. It would be helpful to know if it is the computational tools part that is the hurdle, or is it the thinking about the data, or is it, I don't know.
Well, while people are pondering those questions, and feel free to keep dropping things into the chat as thoughts come to you. Somebody asked, whether there's any seed funding available to encourage collaborative projects. It's certainly something we're thinking about at the college level. I don't know if Sheena wants to add anything from the research office side.
Certainly, we're in the discussion phase about that. The research office is very much behind that. And so we'll see how that rolls out in the near future. Stay tuned.
Looks like there's a quite a specific question on perspectives of RedCap versus Qualtrics as a data storage tool. If anybody either of you want to weigh in on that.
I would love to, except I never use survey data. So that would be a good question for someone who does that sort of stuff. I will say that in general, to the degree that you can store data as text, that is like CSV form or text, you're ahead of the game in general. So.
Yeah, I have not used either of those. And in some sense, that's I don't know. I think the collection of data and where it's stored to a large extent also seems to be very different across disciplines. So Red Hat is completely a health sciences type tool. And I think it's connected to, I don't know, medical record stuff and so on. Qualtrics is much more of a, quickly combine data from survey things, I think.
Yeah, and I would add to all of this that you can, good data storage is storage that does not add or subtract from the data, but faithfully records the data. And so there are some programs, whenever you enter into, you put data in a cell, it adds, zeros or white space or dollar signs or all of this. All of those things are just straight up bad, okay? Because they make your data less usable to you and to whoever else is going to access the data and use it in a generalizable way later on. So any program that's going to do that, you want to avoid, right? And so that's why my general recommendation is if you can store as text or text compatible formats, you're a lot better off. You don't want, I spent 2 hours, my wife is a business executive, and I spent 2 hours one day chasing down white space that some business program had inserted into her data. So just bear that in mind. You don't want programs that change the data.
We had a question from, I think, Matt Martin asks Snehalata whether you give an example of a Friday topic.
Yeah, so we've had, 5 weeks, I think we're on week 6 now, right? So the first 3, 4 weeks really ended up all being different biologists. So it's all been imaging data. So one person using basically infrared photography to try and figure out or try and compare how plants grow in the greenhouse. So this is something that in the old days, grad students would spend time, taking leaves and measuring them, et cetera, looking at their color. And that was destructive sampling. But now if you can photograph them, so, diseased plants versus healthy plants, that sort of thing. Then it was a couple of neuroscience people. So looking at video type data of different, different problems, different zebrafish in one case and fruit flies in another case. And so in both cases, there's the video of the movement of those animals, whatever, fish, but then there's also imaging of what's going on in the cells and so on, which neurons get expressed as, I don't know, the front legs move sort of thing. So it's all been imaging, and it's really to try and figure out whether you can put these different types of imaging data sets together to understand what's going on with neurons. And then one of the sedimentologists, paleosedimentologists, that was the last talk. And again, it was images, but in this case, these are images of landforms. And so you're trying to work out how the paleo processes worked, how sediment was deposited, et cetera, by looking at the images that you see, seismic data and so on. So that's what we've had so far. Hopefully that helps. And then I think the question after that was what skills, attributes do students studying data sciences need to be successful in their studies? So this is sort of I think the usual thing that people will say is, you need to, there's some cute little thing people will what is a data scientist? It's to a statistician, it's a computer scientist, and to a computer scientist, it's a statistician. So effectively, you need enough math so that the math that really makes most of the to understand most of the machine learning algorithms, at least to begin to understand, it's really linear algebra. So, and in order to get to linear algebra, you need to get through the whole calculus sequence. So you need enough mathematical sophistication so that you can understand, you can wrap your head around things as to what the algorithms are doing. Enough statistics to be able to deal with data modeling. And then enough computer science and programming skills really to understand that, and really understand how, how you would distribute data, like parallel computing, all of that sort of stuff, which really is, beyond sort of the 110 or whatever. But more than that, so all of these things, you can be a CS computer science or a stats math major and do this. But the biggest thing I think that makes students different is this problem solving thing. So they've got to have some interest in something else. And I think we see that in students at this point. They're very much focused on, this is my passion, this is what I want to do, and how can I, leverage whatever skills to do that. So. Yep.
Very, so I'm a little mindful of time. We've got a couple of other questions that have popped up. One real quick one is about R and Python workshops coming in the near future. Sheena mentioned a little bit about that already, but I don't know if any of you want to say more about.
So I just mentioned one of three that we have. I think that we've got, gosh, I can't even recall the schedule. I'll have to provide it if you give me.
Well, yeah.
But I know there's an R and Python one. They're typically out in e-news. They're coming up, I think, this month and the next. And then we have the one for the social sciences. The HPC is offering a whole cluster of workshops on regards to how to use that tool as well. So there's a bunch of different things. So I know that for those of you who don't read e-news, I'm sorry, but I think that's one of the principal channels.
What we can do is we have an email list for this call, so I can ask one of the students to perhaps bundle up a bunch of these links that are coming, and so that we all have access to them. Yeah, we have a nice question from Laura Brady there in the chat about.
Yeah, I just typed an answer. Yeah. At least one answer to that.
Very good.
Thanks.
Any other thoughts? Well, we have our various experts online here, and you all as interested faculty. I see this as being, this type of event we can think about in going forward into future semesters, and perhaps tailoring it in certain directions depending on interest. Perhaps having an event focused more towards humanities, for instance, one time, and other ideas as well. Yeah, and as Leah mentions, feel free to contact us in the Eberly College for help putting in touch with people. Claude, if you could drop the survey link into the chat one more time. Yes, that would be great. If you could, drop any ideas for future workshops and give us some feedback on today, that would be really fantastic. If there are any other final remarks people want to make, or any last questions, can take one quick one. If not, I do want to thank both Snehalata and Sam for their time today in preparing this material, which I think was very useful to set the stage for, what's going to be an ongoing theme, and certainly a developing one in the years ahead. And thank you all for joining us.
I would just like to say, Dunk, as well, that if anyone is planning projects they see that are data science adjacent and want to seek funding for those projects, the Institute for Policy Research is very amenable to those types of endeavors, and we'd like to at least consult with you on that. So.
Fantastic.
Yeah, thank you. And feel free to email and find me.
We'll track you down.
Track me down. Hey, can I just mention one last thing?
Yep.
So I think, especially since Cindy fetches their extension, there has been an effort among some data scientists to try and get data science into the USDA, through the extension service. This is there's a I can email you information. I sent it to Sam. We just recently talked about this. So there's a Biocomplexity Institute at University of Virginia. And they actually had a pilot project that, and Sloan Foundation was involved. And the thinking is, we've been getting other kinds of information to people. So even at the ground level, using data to make decisions is really.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyway.
I appreciate it.
All right. But thanks, everybody. And we'll be in touch about next month's roundup. But you all have a good rest of the week.